We start with updates coming in from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The M23 rebels have launched a fresh offensive along with Rwandan forces in DRC's mineral-rich east. Days after declaring a unilateral ceasefire, intense clashes broke out yesterday as the M23 rebels and the Rwandan troops seized a mining town in the region as per reports. They have captured the town of Nyabibwe in the South Kivu province, now around 100 kilometers away from the provincial capital of Bukavu and around 70 kilometers away from the nearest airport. Earlier, the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu province and the largest city in the mineral-rich east. They had also vowed to march all the way to the capital Kinshasa, however, later said that they have no intent to seize further territory as they declared a ceasefire. The DRC now says that the renewed fighting is proof that the unilateral ceasefire was in fact a ploy. In more than 3 years of fighting between the Rwanda-backed group and the Congolese army, half a dozen ceasefires and truces have been declared before being unceremoniously broken. The latest escalation comes just days before the Rwandan and Congolese presidents are due to attend a crisis summit this weekend. Rwandan President Paul Kagame says his country is taking a defensive posture against the rival ethnic militia supported by the DRC. However, Kigali is facing an intense public pressure to withdraw support for the rebels, as he is also being accused of looting minerals from the DRC. Meanwhile, a DRC military court has issued an international arrest warrant against the leader of a rebel alliance. That includes the M23 rebels for war crimes and treason. The warrant has been issued for Colonel Nanga, who in 2018 orchestrated the heavily criticized vote that handed President Felix Tshisekedi power. Today, he is the face of rebel coalition that are fighting to oust Tshisekedi. Nanga also said that the rebels will march to Kinshasa to quote-unquote liberate the capital. Though M23 rebels captured Goma in 2012 as well, this is the first time it seems they want to form a government. They have so far defeated thousands of foreign mercenaries hired by the DRC government. Thousands of peacekeeping forces from several African nations still remain on the ground. Many of them have died in the clashes, raising concerns of a wider regional conflict. As a ceasefire was declared, Malawi ordered to withdraw its troops, but violence has returned to the DRC. As per the United Nations, around 3,000 people have lost their lives in the clashes since last week. Thousands more have been displaced. In North Kivu's captured capital of Goma, there are reports of hundreds of women being raped and burned alive after a prison was set on fire. Hospitals have been overwhelmed and have also come in the line of fire during the fighting. Shells and bombs have torn through the walls.
We have experienced infrastructure destruction. Shells or bombs fell on the roof of the neonatal unit, damaging the solar panels and the roof itself. Additionally, at Clinic C, one of the rooms also suffered roof damage. Inside the room, we found bullets or shrapnel that had destroyed the walls. If someone had been there, they would have died.
In South Kivu's capital of Bukavu, which now appears to be the next big target for the Rwanda-backed rebels, hundreds of residents gathered and prayed for peace.
This is our role to play. We have already advocated, taken action, and supported displaced people. Now we add prayer to these efforts like Esther, like the Virgin Mary. We kneel together, united, to ask the Lord to touch the hearts of our leaders, Rwandan leaders, and all national and international leaders. We believe God will hear us because nothing is impossible for Him, especially now that we have set aside our divisions to come together.
Was the M23's declaration of a ceasefire a ploy? And will it further weaken the DRC in the fighting? Now, for more on this, we have with us Vincent Roger, who is the head of political risk for Africa at Control Risks, joining us live from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Alison, for having me.
Now, given the apparent violation of the M23's unilateral ceasefire and the seizure of a mining town in South Kivu, how do you assess the current balance of power on the ground? And what does this suggest about the DRC government's capacity to respond effectively?
Well, it's pretty clear by now that this declaration of ceasefire really wasn't one at all, and that if anything, he may have been intended to buy a bit of time or to buy a little bit of goodwill. As you've mentioned, we have an international summit of East African and Southern African leaders coming out at the end of this week. So perhaps the ceasefire was a little bit of a ploy, as you said, to gain some goodwill. But what's clear with the latest advance and the latest capture of Nyabibwe, an important trading hub on the road between Goma and Bukavu, is that the M23 still has, for now, the military upper hand. And we have heard reports, even the last 24 hours, that the Congolese army has further retreated closer to Bukavu, and the next big site and big targets for fighting will likely be Kavumu Airport. So there's the main airport servicing Bukavu, but also a major military facility for the DRC authorities. At the moment, it looks like the M23 rebels have the upper hand, even though the FARDC are getting some support from Burundi. And it's hard to say, where it will end, but for clear, they are the leading power at the moment.
What role, both overt and covert, do the neighboring countries, particularly Rwanda, play in this renewed offensive? And how might the regional and international diplomacy address these cross-border tensions that are clearly fueling the conflict?
Well, you have a growing body of evidence, pretty clear now, that points to very strong Rwandan support for the M23, even though Rwanda has always declined to acknowledge it. So at the beginning, you do have that foreign dynamic. What I think is important to mention over the last few weeks is we've also seen that conflict draw in troops from Burundi on the government side. And we've also heard earlier this week additional military deployments from Uganda. So increasingly, we're looking at the potential threat of this drawing in the whole regional bloc and becoming a bit of a regional conflict, because you do have these backers on either side. That means, as you said, part of the resolution of that conflict definitely involves diplomacy at the state-to-state level between these parties, and resolving some pretty deep-seated animosity by now.
And Vincent, how is this renewed fighting likely to impact the civilian populations and local economies, especially in the mining areas? And in your view, what steps should be taken by both the DRC government and the international community in order to mitigate this humanitarian fallout?
Yeah, well, we've seen it with the fall of Goma, and as you alluded to in your report, it's been a pretty horrific humanitarian impact, both in terms of loss of life and overwhelmed hospitals, massive displacements of population. And as we see the conflict now moving towards Bukavu, we can only fear the same outcome. And throughout the places where the M23 is gradually conquering, we're seeing the same humanitarian toll in terms of displacement through the fighting. What can the international community do? Well, the immediate answer lies in a ceasefire and in getting a genuine ceasefire that sticks, that is endorsed by the different parties, and likely will involve some form of humanitarian corridors or an acceptance of humanitarian activities, because a lot of these activities have now been suspended or cut short by the fighting. We know that even about 2 weeks after the capture of Goma now, there are still pockets of the city where the humanitarian community cannot access. So it's more urgent than ever to get a pause in the fighting and to allow these humanitarian organizations to resume.
Right. Vincent, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights and analysis there.
Thank you.
We're calling the show Vantage. We hope you like what we put together for you. Touted as the minimum defense from that video. India's neighbors were the first to send This special edition of Vantage, live from the White House throughout this week. Yes, Hindu Mandir in we're on our way to Tel Aviv. Pretty measure, but it's also the perfect way to drive.
I don't think that
Prime Minister of Bhutan, Sherin Tagwe. Welcome to
60% of the world's
office. Prime Minister Modi did the iron.
we were actually
How are you doing? How do you like? It's been 1 year since that meeting. Iron bars separate you from the outside. Out the vote efforts. Trump had, it says, and at $4.3 trillion. 4.3 300 billion by 2030. That's what we need to tackle climate change.